Hello everyone, I'm Ratika from Growth Sutra and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you all to our LinkedIn live session 2020 X Vision Selling to the Global C-Suite Fast Track Hard Truths Bold Wins. Before we begin our session, I would request you all to please share your name and your location in the comment section. We have assembled an exceptional panel of industry leaders who will bring diverse perspectives and decades of combined experience in navigating the complex world of executive level sales. So, firstly, we have Dr. Edna Aimi Yael, who is an international communication and business consultant. Secondly, we have Deepak Bhutra, CEO at Jubilee Consulting LLC. We also have Eric Sano, Managing Director at Blue Leopard. And lastly, we have Vishendra Verma, Founder and CEO of Growth. In our today's session structure, we have organized our discussion into three powerful segments to maximize your takeaway. First, we have the fast track, product services, and positioning their plans. Second, we have the hard truths, what sellers get wrong, and last, the bold wins, what actually works. So I encourage you all to actively participate by sharing your questions in the comment section. We'll try to address as many as possible during the Q&A. So, without further delay, let's begin this illuminating journey into mastering the art and science of C-suite selling. Over to you, Vishendra.
Thank you, Ritika. Thank you for such a lively introduction to all of us. Welcome to 2028 Vision, the series where we tackle what actually drives growth in high stakes B2B. Today's session is a special one. We are zeroing in on one of the most powerful yet challenging audiences in any deal, which is the C-suite. So you can run the perfect campaign, deliver the cleanest demo, but if the executive room doesn't say yes, the deal doesn't move. Or worse, it dies quietly at 80% CRM probability. So I'm Vishwendra, founder of Growth Sutra, and your host today. With me, we have three brilliant minds who have helped brands with win trust and traction at the top. Let me quickly talk about them. Edna is bringing a lot of rich experience, especially from international communication and marketing strategy. She is based in Europe, in Paris, with deep experience advising C-suites through transformation and crisis across sectors like tobacco and air transport IT. So welcome, Edna.
Hello.
Eric is the owner of US-based marketing consultancy firm, and he's also a fractional CMO as well as a growth leader, bringing extensive expertise in GTM strategy, marketing operations, and digital transformation from roles at companies like Accenture, GM, and Info. Great to have you, Eric. Deepak, also joining from US. Deepak is the owner of sales consultancy focusing on sales transformation, mindset coaching using methodologies like Sandler, following decades in global sales ops leadership. Welcome, Deepak. So, to kick things off and to also align with the agenda, um, I understand all three of you have had decades of experiencing, influencing, or advising C-suites across sectors, across cultures, and continents. So, why is cracking the C-suite still so elusive, even for experienced sellers? So, maybe let's just start with Edna.
Okay, well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you and for all of the people watching live, as well as those who will be seeing us on replay from around the world. Look, I think cracking the C-suite is extremely elusive and complex because it's not just one single tactic or one single door, right? It's a series of doors you have to open, and they're closed in different ways. They're locked, they're different keys, etc. And so basically, when I'm looking at this, and I work primarily on projects that are cross-border in nature, I think that the sellers often don't understand or they underestimate how you have to look at different levels. So you have to look at the national culture, you need to look at the company culture, and you also need to look at the individual executives' personalities and their preferences. Okay, and I think my colleagues here will be discussing in more detail the actual tactics of speaking to individual members of the C-suite. But when I'm thinking of it in a more macro level, and bringing in, like Erin Meyer or Hofstede or some of the theory around culture, I think you really need to think about how decision making is done in the different markets that you're entering. Okay, so in a place like France where I live, it's extremely hierarchical. You have a conversation with the CEO, and she or he makes a decision, and then boom, it goes down. Okay, you try to sell the same product in more or less the same company in the Netherlands, and all of a sudden you need to completely change your tactic because you're working more on consensus, right? So I think that when we are younger professionals, we're really focusing on the individual leader, and I think that as we move more into selling, especially selling across borders, we need to really take the time to reflect on how a one-size pitch doesn't work across the board, and how you really need to look at all these different layers. Again, sort of the national preferences, if you will, and then I'll talk about that in more detail later. The corporate culture and how decisions are made in the individual company, because that can change dramatically. And at the end of the day, there are also individual preferences. I mean, I'm an American, and we can look at our current president and our previous president, and they both had different ways of making decisions, and we see that can have different implications. And with that, I'll pass it back to you, Vish. Thank you.
Thank you, Edna. Thank you for sharing those insights. I think that angle of Europe is certainly very interesting, considering the fact that there it's a cause across different countries. There's a different culture, different languages which are being used. So there's a diversity in place, and connecting with diverse leaders with such nuances is certainly a challenging task. And I see a lot of the startups, or even emerging enterprises in India, they do face that challenge in terms of connecting with countries, C-suite, especially in Europe, because they do not understand the culture over there.
If I can just add to that, Vish, when you talk about speaking the wrong language, it's not just I'm speaking German, I'm speaking French. It's really that sort of the way that you approach people, the way that people build trust, the way that people make decisions, the people absorb information, that becomes so important.
Yeah. Eric?
So for me, it's about building trust, right? And trust is a little bit different in different cultures, even within a country, right? Regions change, industries change. So it's about building trust, and trust comes from a couple of things. One, do you build intimacy with these folks? Intimacy means, do they share things about their company with you that they don't share with others, right? Are you reliable, right? Are you trustworthy? And then they measure that, right? And they say, how self-interested are they? Are they only pushing their agenda, or are they interested in mine? So it's a very unique dynamic, right? Because that denominator is always there. What's their self-interest level? And if your self-interest level is too high, you can never get to that trust, no matter how credible you are, etc., because they think you're all about you.
Let me move to Deepak quickly. Deepak?
I think you're asking a very broad question of me, right? For me, when I look at approaching the C-suite, I've had both perspectives. I've sold to, and I've actually been sold to as well on the sales operations side, where I've had pitches made to me. And one thing that I've really realized is that the guys that got my checkbook out very quickly, and I'm going to give you that perspective, were the people that actually understood that getting a meeting is the easy part to it, right? But then the pitch, it's not about, how do you say this in a very crude way? It's not about making me excited. It's actually about following my decision planning and my decision cycle. these people actually had a good understanding of where we were internally from a thought process point of view, Vish, and that makes it very incredible. Decision making cycles, instead of looking at their CRM and then saying that, hey, my CRM says that I'm on meeting number 2, so I'm at 80%, they're actually looking at the decision making cycle. What is it that the customer wants? What is it that I wanted from them? And I think that's very important for me to pitch. Budget cycles, the planning season, what's happening, internal restructuring, those are all critical variables. And the guys that actually do a great job where they make sure that things don't get stuck, because that's the focus of this conversation, right? Are the guys that actually are aligning not to their CRM or the fact that they committed to have this deal closed in 30 days, but they're actually looking very carefully as to they understand what access means, they understand what engagement means, and they're very, very focused on my internal calendar, my internal needs. And those are the rock stars that get the checkbook ultimately. That's how I would position my experience of the rockstar B2B sellers that have got my checkbook, what they said to me, what they did with me. So it's not just only my own experience, but it's sitting on the other side, watching and learning. I have also learned from that experience. Back to you, sir.
Thank you, Deepak. And while you shared all the great insights, I also feel that whenever you're talking about C-suite communication, it's always strategic communication that's in play. So whenever I have interacted with the founders or with the C-level, C-suite, I always felt that if your communication is around the strategy and not about tactics, that's where it kind of have a better impact when you are interacting with C-suite. But anyway, we are going to delve further in some of these nuances in the segments which Ritika earlier talked about. So let's begin with the first segment, which is on the fast tracks, product, services, and positioning that lens. And while getting in is one thing, getting remembered and invited back is another. And research suggests only 10% of the C-suite executives feel initial sales calls provide enough value for a follow-up. So getting the right approach, the positioning, the language is absolutely critical. Is even get on their radar. So I'll come to Edna. With your deep background advising leaders globally from tobacco to air transport IT, what is that single sharpest lever that can fast track approach to the C-suite? And if we look at from the perspective of products, services, and positioning, so which
Okay.
lever do you think?
So for me, I'm going to go back to sort of what I was saying earlier, which is that I really think that the lever that comes through is what I would call sort of that you have a cultural fluency in the way that you're approaching these people. So what's my value and what am I bringing to the leader, and how is that going to respect both the executive's preference, right, as well as the local context. And I'll give a very specific example, of an unnamed IT consulting company that came into Europe. And one of the mistakes that these guys were making is that they were selling very technical solutions to CEOs and CFOs, and they were bringing in their engineers, and it just was falling flat, right? Because think about me with my iPhone. I want it to work. I don't necessarily want to know how it works, right? And in this particular company, when they really made the change and were able to really explode their business, it's when they started to send their CMO, to have the conversations and to speak in more general, less technical terms, because what the future clients really wanted was to have solution to their business pain, and the actual technical aspect was not as relevant in this particular case, where you're dealing with primarily industrial or transportation companies that are purchasing from an IT vendor, without going into the details of the company. So that to me is really key, that you have the right person giving the right type of message. Now, there are other industries where people who are in charge are extremely technical, and they really want all the details. Or there's some CEOs, and Vish, you and I worked when we were at CETA together. We worked for a CEO who was extremely interested in the operational. Okay.
Yeah.
And for me, that was a huge change, because prior to being at Sita, I had been in Panalpina, which was a logistics company, where I had a CEO who was much more on the strategic side. So now in both of these cases, I was sort of in-house, but again, you have to adapt to the preference of the person, and that's the lever. So it's this soft skill / cultural fluency, I think, that gets you in the door and gets the trust built, as my colleagues have said.
No, that's a fascinating point, Edna. But it's, even like in terms of initial C-level conversation, what's a contrarian communication tactic you have seen successfully spark genuine executive curiosity? How you can cut through the noise and get to that C-suite with a. Have you used any contrarian communication tactic to connect with the C-suite?
Well, I tend I'm trying to think. I'll give one example, and this was in Switzerland as well, in the German part of Switzerland, and it was a bit odd for me, because a lot of the especially in industries there, a lot of the C-suite are male. Let's be honest, and they're German speakers, and I am neither of these things. And I'd worked for many years in the French part of Switzerland, and wasn't as familiar with the environment in the German part. And I was really surprised at these executives, how open they were about what I, as an American, consider more private things: family, children, and I realized that if they mention their child or something, and it's okay for me to show a picture of a phone, of my kid, which I would never ever do or have done before, and I was able to build connections that way. So again, it wasn't necessarily something that I did that I initiated, but I was able to build some relationships and kind of get into the club, if you will, in this environment, through communicating on a human level, rather than trying to be very forced and professional.
Good point. And if you have a skeptical or a hard to reach executive, so what is there any specific tone or choice of words or language that can give an edge?
Again, I think it's really about following up with the type of sort of pressure vocabulary that is appropriate in the industry and in the culture that you're talking about. When you're in Germany, Switzerland, you talk about compliance. In the U.S., it's all about sort of speed, market edge, etc. In France, it needs to be sort of contextually within the strategy of where the business is going. So I think that it's really just sort of hitting again those levers in a very well thought out and strategic way.
Thank you, Edna. Let me now move to Eric, since you talked about US. So, Eric, you have a very rich experience in terms of working with SaaS and even services company. So, when you're pitching a product or versus pitching a service, what is the narrative shift needed to earn trust at the top?
Typically, there are two traditional kind of narratives, right? For product, it's okay, here's what we do, here's what we can do, here's the technical specs, here's the timelines, here's the ROI, and you're focused on solving a very specific need. With transformation services, right, you have to consider long-term partnership, how we build capability, how do we mitigate risk. But in both cases, I always start with something fundamental, right? The company has a need or a want, right? So I talk about what business outcomes and what strategic impact will these products have on your business. I always start there. So even though there's a difference between the two narratives, I always start there, because if you understand and you get to an agreement with the C-suite on what the business outcomes and strategic impact is, you're speaking their same language. And once you start speaking their same language, the sale becomes much easier.
Correct. Exactly. So when you are, so of course it's like when you are pitching a product and you are pitching a service. Of course, there's some of the nuances that you talked about can be applied. When we are talking about a bundled solution, a lot of the organizations that I work here, they actually prefer to have a bundled solution. Product as well as service. Service is sometimes a bread and butter for them, while product is something which is they're launching, and they are not getting traction. So they feel that while you're having a service based business, product will also get traction. And then they start bundling both together. So how do you see a narrative shift? And when you bundle that product and service, there's also some complexity that comes into play when you are speaking to a CEO. So how do you bring clarity when you have a bundled offering?
So, having been both a buyer and a seller of bundled services, right, where you buy X product and there's certain amount of services attached, it is very complex. The way to look at this is, okay, I'm going to structure my messaging around what they're trying to accomplish, then explain how the combination of the product and the services helps them get there. Then I go on to create a very strong visual framework, right? Most folks are visual framework of how they work together. Then I follow up with a modular messaging where we talk about core transformation in certain messages, right? Some product details. And all of those are distinct but interconnected to keep driving at that value proposition, that outcome that they're trying to get. And lastly is you have to have a clear swim lane, right, of when you're discussing product versus the service. So it does get very complex, but it's a question of mapping it out, right? Typically, my process goes, okay, we're going to go talk to a company. Let's build a relationship map. Who do we know internally? If we don't know internally, who do we know that can do it? Then what's the account plan? What is it that we're trying to accomplish with them? And then reach out and start the conversations in a very structured but fluid way.
Got it. So, of course, when you are pitching product and services, there are various stakeholders who are involved in an organization, and some would relate to product, some would relate to service, and sometimes these stakeholders become gatekeepers, and they do not let you access a C-suite. So, how do you manage these gatekeepers to while because C-suite decision certainly matters even in terms of decisions which are required for a product or a service. So how do you manage these gatekeepers and get access to C-suite?
Managing gatekeepers is a two-edged sword. And I'll tell you a story. When I was working for General Motors, a guy reached out to me, right? And I said, you're in the wrong budget cycle. Come back next year, right? He didn't like the answer. So he went directly to the C-suite, to a guy that he'd gone to university with, and it came down and hit me in the head, right? So now I'm not happy, right? I'm absolutely not happy. And we designed a pilot, and guess what? Do you think that product ever made it out of that pilot? Right? Because I went completely around them. So you have to work through the gatekeepers in a very positive way so that the gatekeepers, right? You got to make a determination. Does this gatekeeper have the internal juice, right? The connections to connect you to the C-suite? If not, can they connect you to somebody else that's in their peer group that can bring you up and work with them through a process of self-discovery to work your way up? Anytime you do an end run around them, it's a sure recipe for a problem. Deepak, Edna, what do you guys think?
I like the gatekeeping example you gave, Eric. And to be honest with you, it's an ego thing, isn't it? when your approach is someone, it's, if we're not in the military where a boot imprint on your neck is the sign of amazing grace, right? That's not where we are. And I think this is again one of those moments of education. I think Eric's point is very valuable. There are multiple doors to knock. There are also multiple people to go through. I think the successful seller is the one that actually navigates the jungle very well. He builds relationships, he builds a network. Because if you intend to keep selling in that account, you cannot afford to break doors down or burn bridges. So I like what you said, Eric, there. I support you on that one.
Okay, just one more question here, Eric. So, how do you identify false champions? So there might be some people who would come and say, okay, we could get you access to the
It's
C-suite, or we can.
false champions are actually relatively easy to spot,
Yeah.
right? Because the first thing that false champions do, right, is they focus relentlessly on the product or service and not the business outcomes. They typically don't have the kinds of executive relationships they need to get things done, right? They can't tell you why this is important to the organization, right? They're very enthusiastic, but they never advance the initiative. And lastly, is they're typically tell you, yeah, I'm making the decision, but I got to go get approval from so and so. So I mean, there's some clear tells, and those are just the major ones.
Thank you. Edna, do you have anything to add here?
No, I agree. I was going to add to Eric. Another one is that we need to clarify the budget for it as well, is another obvious obvious tell.
Or I need to socialize this internally.
Yeah, oh, yeah. No,
That
that's
word
fair.
is so bad, Vish. I have to socialize this internally. You immediately know that this is uphill. What does that even mean?
I will add one thing to what Eric is saying. Sometimes decision making is not necessarily done according to the organigram as we know it, or the public or organigram. I can think of one example where I was given the green light by a CEO for a sale, and later he had to backpedal because basically the CFO said no, and that should never ever happen, but it does, and I think it's really important sometimes to realize that the organigram that is public, or the organigram that you believe is a map of your stakeholder, may not be as clear or as delineated as you think. And that can be a big mistake.
A good point, Edna. So let me now transition to Deepak. And Deepak, before we move to second segment, I have a question, which is because you have seen sales motions succeed or stall based on excess. So what GTM rhythms give sellers a real shot at getting a top executive early? And how do you know when it's just excess or versus real executive engagement?
Oh, wow. We could spend an hour on that question, right? And this is just only segment one. Let me actually speed up because I think I covered some element of that. Because access is one thing, engagement is another, right? I got the great meeting, I got the email, went in, the pitch is there. But remember the comment I made about internal calendars and alignment on those, Wish? That's extremely critical. Budget cycles, planning season, internal restructuring, you need to be aware of these. I call these rocks under the water, but they are actually very visible if you know what you're looking for, and do that. One more hint I can give you is that look for the tension. I mean, any access I've noticed typically relies upon tension, and what that means is the CFO. Edna, you made a point about CFO versus CEO, right? Those guys who actually manage and navigate that very well are the guys that are going to get that access and engagement.
Yeah.
That's one thing. Now, I think there was a part two to your question, which is, and how do you know when it's just access versus real executive engagement? Again, I think this was also answered to some degree. There's a light that goes off in an exec's eyes that tells you got engagement. And I'll tell you what happens here is we're doing a pitch and we're trying to do a pricing system. And the pricing system is, this is the slogan: we will replace your sales rep with high intelligence. when it comes to pricing, and it's all automated. Instead of giving a price in 6 hours, we're going to give you a price in 6 minutes. Awesome. But the CFO loves it. But there's this light that's switched off from the chief sales officer's eyes, because in his mind, you just actually brought in an inside engine that's going to wipe out his sales force, right? And there's no sales guy that's going to just stand up and like, admit that they are going to allow its tool or system, because at the end of the day, selling is a very powerful and a very noble profession, right? So the light goes on when you actually watch the salesperson go and turn the switch the other way. This is not about replacing a salesperson. It's about actually giving them more consistency and power. We're actually giving them more control over the pricing and more control over the relationship. We are actually improving your win rate. What happens at that point is that the CSO suddenly realizes, oh, this is a decision support mechanism, not a replace my salesperson. So that is when he says, this is awesome. Could you guys work with two of my senior guys that are really in charge of all the change management and make sure that when we do this, that this vision or this perspective is clearly hammered to the sales guys so that they understand they need to adapt and adopt this? Because I think this is very powerful if done the right way. That's when you know that you've got the engagement, not just access. You have to look for these verbal cues.
Got it.
Back to you,
I
Vish.
think. Thank you, Deepak. Thank you so much. So let's talk about the brutal truths or the hard truths which normally sellers miss. Okay, Deepak. So if you can talk about specific myths that sellers falls for most of the times. So if you can highlight, share some myths and case studies around it.
I'm going to share just one myth, and it's a constant theme that I've started with on this one. And this is, I think, it's one that Eric also aligns to quite a lot, right? Just if I could print this on a t-shirt, this is what I would print, Eric. Deals move on sales cadence. They do not move on executive timing. Just stop.
Yeah.
Just stop, please, and stop doing CRM speak. I got 90 days. The deals backlog. My backlog is this. My aging is this. My sales stage is 6. It doesn't matter. No one cares. And you can have the best value story, but you got to understand the timing. If you are going to go walk in while there's a capex freeze going on and talk about your product or
Exactly.
something, you're dead. Just you're highly insensitive. Also, by the way, I mean, can you imagine right now? We have tariffs, other discussions ongoing, right? We have trade wars going on, and you're walking in with a solution which is completely 180 degrees to the thought process. What's on their mind? So you got to understand that. One of the things I've realized, which made me fall over laughing, is that announcement has come out that morning about an org structure, and this is a true story, and I'm going back maybe a long time ago, and we get a pitch about how can we streamline this for you and how can we do this, and the example that we're talking about had no context to the big announcement that had come out that day. So for me, you're dead on arrival if you don't get these talk tracks or these basic fundamentals right. So the myth that you have to make the deal move on a sales cadence is an amazing one. It's a sign of poor seller behavior and understanding. Deals move on executive timing. Synchronize your biological clock to your customer's biological clock. When they feel pain, you feel pain. When they smile, you smile. And I know it sounds horrendous, but that is absolutely the truth.
Can I follow up on Deepak? Because I think in addition to that, you also need to have language alignment. And what I've seen is that there's certain phrases, okay, which the brain just immediately turns off, okay? Change management, transformation. For some people, they want transformation, okay? But if it's someone who wants continuity in their business, then the second you use these buzz phrases, right, they just literally, you can see them shut down, okay? And so, you need to think about not only the timing, like Deepak said, but also the language and align your pitch to what these people care about and feel about. Okay, so you don't have the right tone, you're not going to have the right outcome.
Oh, yeah.
So that's a very important point. Words matter.
100%.
How you describe the initiative. I was involved in one, getting a lot of pushback because they were describing it in IT terms. Right? I invited some folks to lunch. This was in Latin America, right? Went to lunch at 3 p.m, finished at 1 a.m. And I convinced, this is you're going to sell more initiative. Here's what it does for lead gen. Here's what it does for your websites. Here's what it does for CRM. Here's what it does for your sales processes. You will sell more if you do these things. And they said, Now we get it. Before it was described in IT terms, and they were like this, didn't even part their hair, and they kept pushing back. We don't need it.
Correct, exactly. So, we also got a couple of questions. In fact, there's this question, and this is my question to you, Deepak, the next question that I had. But you can probably take a contra view in terms of what are the brutal truth here. So, there's a question: how can we manage objections towards their personal perceptions versus their business needs? So, customers certainly have, C-suite have their own priorities. So we can take a contribute answer to Philip this question that
I,
you raised.
this is how I would answer Philip, right? Philip, let's just go back 1 second. Before objections comes discovery, right? You need to understand the pain. And one of the things that I have realized happens very well with a great seller is that he gets into pain conversation not only on the business objectives wish, but he actually gets into pain conversation to actually understand, is there any personal pain that executive is feeling? As an example, his bonus could be online, right? Because the project is floundering. Or he may be on some sort of an accelerator. If he achieves the following objectives, he's going to get a kicker, which could be a Mercedes Benz in his driveway, as an example like that, right? Personal pain also could be that he has been in the office for every weekend because something is going on. So now if you look at that, now you get to objections, right? Objections also take the same nature. So if you've done the right discovery and you've done the right pain discussion, you actually have gone through not just the surface level, but you've gone deeper. For me, from that you can actually start building up what objections do you think may come up at a very personal level. So as a simple example, right, I have a solution that's going to change the world. It'll change the world in 6 months from now, but until we get to 6 months, you're going to have a lot of work that needs to happen, because sometimes it's not just about investment in terms of money, but it's about time and resource also. So if an overburdened CFO sees a project that's going to require him to give another 20% of his time, which he does not have, I can assure you that's going to come out in the form of an objection. And it's going to be a very personal objection, but it's going to come out in logic, whereas it's emotional. We know that. And that's where the best sellers are going to focus and be tuned to understanding that. So my response at that point would be, knowing that objections are coming up, to make sure that you can handle personal objections, you need to understand what's personal pain. Then you can kind of predict what the objection would look like, connect the two dots, and that's how I would approach it. Now, I'm not going to give precise examples, I'm just talking about a framework. I've realized that the guys that can handle so-called personal objections need to also understand what's the difference between a personal objection and a business objective. It's got to do with pain. Something is happening that's going to make this guy either very happy or very sad. Then I've also realized in my term, and I think Eric, I could pull you into this one, is if I tell a CFO that he's going to have a great time 9 months from now, but he's going to have a very horrible time right now, I can assure you he's not going to like the sound of that.
Mhm.
No one can see 3 quarters down the road, but they can see immediate. So tomorrow's gain has to be far greater than today's pain for it to resonate very well. And that's what you need to do when you're doing these personal objections versus business objectives. Business objectives tend to go through a cycle. You're going to have if I could draw a graph, you're going to most likely be in negative territory on emotion, negative territory in terms of funding. You're going to get positive daylight. But to be honest with you, if your CFO is looking for a promotion and he's most likely to exit in 2 years, he is not going to be that excited at a very personal level about some magic hocus pocus that you're going to do at that point. You need to find the balance. Back to you.
So, if I may add something, uh, to pile on to what Deepak said, first you ruthlessly research, then you understand why they wouldn't buy from you,
Mhm.
and then getting over objections, you take them through a process of self-discovery, right? I can give you the answer all day long, but
Mhm.
until it comes from you and you believe it's your idea, right, you won't accept it. So it's taking them through a process of self-discovery so that they get to the point where they say, oh, I see how this makes my life better, right? We can proceed.
Eric, I think you're right. I think there's also a level of humility that we need to have,
Mhm.
because especially if we're in a consulting role or in a selling role where we see many different companies. It may be that it's extremely obvious to us what a solution should be, okay, or what steps can be taken, and when you're having that conversation with someone who hasn't had that kind of experience because they've been in one company, for X amount of years or decades, or their company is slower on the transformation than other companies, then you really need to get time and be humble enough so that the individual, as you said, Eric, sort of takes this up as his or her own idea,
Own idea.
and you're not sounding as though you're being patronizing. And sometimes, when you're selling something for the 30th or 50th time and it's going to work, you sort of want to cut corners, right? And you have to resist that urge.
There's this saying that I can again put onto a t-shirt, and this is coming from my background with Sandler training. It's the wish that people never argue their data, but they'll argue your data to death. So if you are building an argument, even if it's your data, the positioning has to be very, very, very gently done.
Yeah.
And if you hear an idea and if you can build upon it, but credit the earlier idea. That always gets that exec interested. It's his notion. And to be honest with you, and I'm being very careful before I stereotype or label execs, right? But execs are execs because they have certain attributes. And some of those attributes could be that they are narcissists, maybe, right? I'm just, maybe they survive on Diet Coke and cigarettes. I don't know. But they tend to ideate fast. They tend to move fast also. So if you can attribute those type of things to them, that it's your idea, you will get tremendous buy-in, and then you get the support to have that vision. For me, most of the projects that I've been involved in, 70% fail because of lack of change management and vision alignment. Full stop. You can raise all the millions and millions. I mean, I've been on projects $57 million to revamp your CRM over the next 3 years, and people approve it because there's a benefit to it, right? But then it fails miserably. Why? Because they didn't go and hire the 6 people that were needed. They didn't bring in the account execs as change agents. They actually botched up the training, or they ended up whipping salespeople to complete forms without actually explaining what's in it for them. It's the proverbial going to war and your horseshoe fell off because you couldn't put that nail in, right? My English fails me at this point. I'm better at Indian metaphors, but Hindi metaphors. But anyway, back to you, Vish.
So can I pile on at that point? I don't sell change management as a separate line item anymore. It's built into the process.
Mm-hmm.
The reason for that, right? I was doing a project at a Fortune 5 company, right? A C-suite member looked at it and said, "We don't need change management. People will do what we tell them to do."
Yes.
Right? They spend a couple $1 million with us and then didn't have the success that they were expecting. Right? So I learned, A, you build it in, and B, you position it as a high value, because I actually did a project for a different company in healthcare. They asked me to do a talk on change management to the entire leadership team. I said, "Sorry, I can't do that. You have to pay me." And they paid me $10,000 plus travel expenses to go tell them, right? So basically it was paid business development. They paid me to sell to them, right? Very contrarian way to approach it, but it worked.
But it
Because
worked.
they didn't think I was selling to them. They thought they were paying me to give them my advice.
That's true. So we have one more question that has come from Aditya, but Aditya will take your question in the next segment. I have a few more questions for our panelists, and one of the questions that I have is, when we look at C-suite decisions, these are often hinge on hidden agendas or political undercurrents. So, Edna, could you share any example on how you can surface these sensitive issues in your conversation with the C-suite without derailing the relationship and losing the deal?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's so many different aspects to this. I would start, first and foremost, really by looking at leadership and decision making. So really, how is the decision truly made? Having lived in France for a big part of my adult life, I actually didn't have a French boss until I went to CETA and worked with you, Vish, in 2020. And it was really sort of surprising to me because I'd spent most of my career working for American or Swiss companies. And it was actually almost easier because there was a smaller group making decisions in a very sort of Franco-French organization, even one that purports to be international. And so it's really, as I said, the decision making is one thing for me. The way that information is evaluated, right? Are you persuading your C-suite through principles or through actually the application it is? So, as an American, it's all about the application, it's all about the technology, it's all about the actual thing. Whereas in France or in Germany, it's really the philosophy behind it and what you're trying to achieve. So I think that you really need to think very, very carefully in those directions. And then the last thing, which is quite delicate, especially in working, I would say between Asia and Europe and the US, is how you approach confrontation or disagreement or trying to do that persuasion. And is it something that's done more sort of front facing or a little bit more delicately and subtly, and again, that's something that I think is sort of acquired over time. I have my own. I'm a New Yorker by being raised, so I have my own personal preference, which is quite direct and to the point. One of the best relationships I ever had was with a boss who was Dutch, because Dutch New York goes really, really well. When the CEO is Dutch, I know exactly what to do and when. But the reality of interacting with across cultures, across borders, is really being able to subtly adapt to all of these, both internal political and also just preferences for the way that people do business. And it's extremely complex. I would say one thing that we haven't really touched upon here, but I would just also encourage people who are looking at cross-border business, is to really get local knowledge, get partners who are from the local market, either to mentor you, to help to explain to you, how business is done, how things are done. I worked with Nissan for some time, and it was really helpful to have Japanese people explain to me how the guys in Yokohama were making decisions, because it wasn't something that sort of came natural to me. So I think that that's something as well that can be extremely helpful, especially when one is entering new markets and trying to build business in places where just work is done in a slightly different way. I don't know if Deepak or Eric have anything to add to this.
I think you partly answered Aditya's question. His question, if it's a new region, what should be the first 5 activities one should do to accelerate the GTM? So you partly answered. You mentioned 2 points. Maybe Deepak and Eric, you can add a few points from your end.
I have nothing to add. That was a brilliant answer. I think I'm also looking at the time. There's so many nuggets coming out. Thank you, ma'am. I enjoyed that.
Cool. So there's one more question that I have, and that is with reference to the hype-based narratives, right? So there's a hype which is going about AI, and sellers actually latch on that AI narrative because they feel if they talk about AI, they may probably get their foot in the door.
Yeah.
But it rarely happens, because when you are speaking to pragmatic leaders like CFO or CTO, they understand what is working for them, and can they integrate this hype in their system. So how do do you see that kind of, you must be seeing that kind of trend a lot with the sellers. So how do you tackle those kind of hype narrative? What approach would you recommend?
That's an open question, I guess, right?
Yeah, that's a question to all three of you.
So we're talking about AI, right? This is what I call the elephant in the room. Here's my challenge. I have a doctoral degree for which I use structural equation modeling in the old days. So, and Edna, anyone who does quantitative research is considered a nerd. Unfortunately for me, I made a big mistake, Eric. I never marketed that as predictive analytics. I never marketed it as anything. Now we move along, and I actually see people making tons of money, and I'm sitting trying to figure out where's my career going because I never pitched it and understood it the right way. But because I was also pragmatic, you got to understand, people are mixing up AI and the business world, and they're mixing up the means to the end.
Yeah.
AI is not the end. AI is a means to the end, right? And when it comes to selling, people need to understand AI is what I call the great equalizer wish. It today has brought democratization to sales community where they can actually use tools. And it's no more about bring your own device. Now it's going to be bring your own AI. And I'm predicting the next level of chaos is going to be your internal CRM has a deal score, and your sales rep has also gone and created his own deal score because he's got these snap-on fantastic AI tools. Now you're sitting in a meeting and your deal score is 8 in your CRM, and he says, no, it's actually a 6 or a 10. And you're having this weird conflict going on. I'm just giving a simple example there. AI gives you the illusion of power, but the real people that are going to use it or make be successful is actually that people are using it to learn from. A salesperson that is learning from AI is going to find himself delivering 3x more value in his discussion with his customers and is going to be 2x more productive. And why do I say that? Because I'm actually measuring it. I actually did a review with 8 top key sellers. These are guys in the top 10 percentile of their organizations. And when I had a conversation with them, I actually was shocked how much AI is in their language and in their work. But do their managers know that? No, because no salesperson is going to go into the organization and brag about it that he's leveraging AI. I am now at a point where I would argue that the top sellers are actually using AI to write every second email, check every third comment they put into LinkedIn, but they're never going to tell people that, right? And in fact, they're going to brag about the fact that they're just genuinely smart. AI is one of those things that has accelerated, and I put it when I put my two hands up like this. Eric, the reality is that for me, I watch the top sellers. Their scale of impact is rising rapidly, but so is the scope of impact on this direction. You're gaining time back. You're actually getting very high in the value chain, and those sellers that are learning the fastest about their competition and about what they want. And there's another flip side to AI. If you think you're getting smart as a seller, please be warned, your buyers being is far smarter than you also. So your buyers are also scaling up very quickly. So if you're going to walk in and you're going to have a conversation in the typical stereotype, right? Hey, let's have a beer, or let's have a cup of coffee, or a virtual coffee, and let's discuss. Those days are far gone because most people, when they come to discussions, have already done the work. They already are 10 steps ahead of you. So your relationship and your input has to change dramatically. And this is the catch 22. The same AI that makes your buyer smart is the same AI that's going to make you smarter also. So it's that double-edged sword that Eric, you were speaking about earlier. So this is my last comment that I'm going to make to disappoint people. AI is the great equalizer because it democratizes the process, but it's also going to equalize the playing field out there. There are going to be some salespeople who will disappear. There'll be some who are going to become very powerful. And remember that 20-80 principle, right? The Pareto principle. In any case, today, 20% of the sales reps are delivering 100% of the quota. Ta-ta, ta-ta, it's going to get vicious, ladies and gentlemen. Please be aware of that. Now, that's my long-winded whole caution on AI. The salespeople that are going to get replaced by AI are not going to get replaced by AI. They're going to get replaced by salespeople who use AI to their advantage.
100%.
Full stop. That's the reality. Watch out. You're not going to be stabbed by poor AI. You're going to be stabbed. You're going to be stabbed by augmented intelligence, another AI, which is going to be AI plus salesperson's initiative equals to augmented intelligence. So AI will kill AI, but you will be blaming the wrong AI. It's going to be your fellow compatriot that's going to stab you in the back. The sales guy that became smarter.
Here, there's a Hassan, I see, Bhatti has put in a point, which I was thinking of as well, that if everyone's using the same AI tools, what's the differentiator? And that's spot on, Hassan, and that's exactly what I was going to say. So look, there always are going to be people who are lazy, right? And what I see, I teach in several MBA programs in business schools in France, and I do see with some of the students that they just turn their brains off completely. So building on what Deepak said, it's people who are leveraging the power of AI to create new ways of working, new ways of doing things, and still maintain some of that soft skills will be the ones who will be successful in the end.
Edna, I actually know Hassan. He communicates a lot. He's an amazing guy.
Okay.
I've actually promised him to have a conversation with him. Let me
Okay.
tell you something about AI that blew my mind.
Yeah.
People think that AI is like a demigod, right? Giving them all this, what was it? The Greeks had the I forget the lady that used Oracle, right? The Oracle.
Mhm.
The AI is an oracle, yes, but got to understand, AI has its biases because the same information that was done by human beings is the one that trains that model, right?
Yeah.
Now, so understand that bias, number one. Number two is AI is learning rapidly also. So how Hassan and I are using the tools is also critical. If you're using the tool the same way that you used it 3 months ago, then you're out of whack anyway.
Mhm.
When you look at prompt engineering, how I used to use these tools 2 years ago and how I use them today, even I don't recognize how good I've become at it, right? And as I become good at it, people ask me, so out of a 10, Deepak, where are you? I always answer five, because what I know today will become obsolete tomorrow. And that's the difference with AI. That's the difference with AI. Excel in 20 years became a very complex animal. I am telling you, AI within 1 year, 2 years has become as complex. And I'm not saying I'm scared, but the reality is that I actually have to put in a lot of more effort to remain relevant
Yeah.
in the AI world. Eric, I would love to hear your opinion on AI.
So AI is very interesting to me. There are many, many unresolved issues, legal, ethical, right? If I create something on AI, who owns it? Your point about bias, there's bias both in the data and in the model, right? So it's really about help. You have to do the thinking and have AI do the heavy lifting today. Next year, we'll have a different conversation, right? One of the hot topics that I'm seeing right now is bring your own AI, where people, to your point, Deepak, are using their own AI,
Mhm.
and they're actually putting company information and stuff in the AI, right?
Yes.
So there's a great danger to the company. So we're in such a nascent stage, and people really don't know how to get their fingers around it. Mind you, I use it multiple times every day. I use 6 different AI engines, and I'm like, right? And then I'll go back, but it's always, I'm telling it the role to act, the context, the tone I want the answer in. I've trained it to think the way I do to help me work better, right? So
Exactly. So AI would certainly be a more of an enabler, as I see, and the way I mean, if you use it in a more intelligent manner, that's how you can create a differentiator. Otherwise, everyone is selling the same set of apples or oranges. There's
But you're
the
also,
difference.
everyone's moving towards the mean. If they're all using it without improving on it, then you're just, it means the people who are the low, at the low
Yeah.
end of it go up, but for the top performers, you're just regressing to the mean. So it's not interesting anymore.
So we'll be covering some of these details in our next session, which is going to be on 15th of May. And this session is going to be all about scaling through disruption. You talk about tariffs, AI, global B2B growth. And this conversation is going to be an extension to what we discussed today. We'll talk, together with Edna and other speakers. We'll talk in more detail about tariffs and how AI are reshaping the B2B growth. So do register for this session. There's already there on LinkedIn Live, and Ritika has already shared details about this event. But coming to the next, because we do not have enough time. So just one more question in terms of, what is that the playbook that you would recommend in terms of a bold win or to the emerging enterprises, based on your experience so far. So every one of you, I mean, each one of you can share what
What's
is
an
that.
emerging enterprise? Just what's the definition of emerging enterprise?
Emerging enterprise is one who is on a growth phase.
Oh, that's it. Okay,
Startups.
sorry. I still didn't understand the question. Sorry, Vish. So for once, I'm quiet. I'm gonna
Okay, so
let the intelligent ones answer that.
let
The
me let
the
me let me kind of share some more specifics in terms of, say, if you're talking about bold wins, what is specifically within bold wins, any specific playbook or strategy or tactic that you can share? You talked about business acumen. You talked about sitting with the C-suite to understand, on a coffee table to understand better. So, are there any co-creation or business acumen that you can bring on the table and do some kind of co-creation together with, something on those lines?
Wish I'll just tell you something that I just realized with an explosion. When I was looking at the top sellers, there was something that came out every time. These people are exceptional at making their champions and coaches internally at an organization extremely powerful on becoming champions for them, on being a voice in a room where you are not present as a seller. That ability to flip the coin, which is instead of selling to someone, you're selling with someone, is a huge mind shift. And and I would say one of the topics that really deserves more. Now, this includes co-creation in a different context, which is I would like to go and talk to my CFO and I'm the internal buyer. And now, as a seller, if you realize that someone is going to battle for you at the CFO, but you cannot, due to protocol, be present in that discussion, and you're obligated to co-create material or thought process or something that actually makes your buyer extremely powerful and pitching on your behalf. This is one of the things that people need to do far more aggressively than they do today. A lot of salespeople think that it's not their job to do that. They feel that they're treading on dangerous territory. But I think giving that voice in that room where you are not, more power, more ability to publish, articulate, enhance your solution is actually one of the things that I would argue is very, very important to do.
I
Eric
would
Edna.
add that you also have to think about storytelling format, and that as a seller, you can only ever be a guide. Your customer has to be the hero, and you have to guide them. So you're only ever Yoda. You can never be the hero, right? And a lot of salespeople get that wrong. They want to be the hero. I'm going to come in and fix your problem. And that's not the way that works. You guide the client through a process. They get to the answer, you get paid. Right?
It's
It's a
back to
pretty
the
simple.
humility. It's the humility, right?
Yeah.
Eric?
It is humility,
Humbleness.
yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. So, the while we now wrap up the session because we already 2 minutes past the hour that we kept for the session, but it was great insights from all of you. I think the audience here might have taken a lot of notes and actionable, advice in terms of what they need to do, especially when they are talking about selling to a C-suite. And I'd like to thank you again for joining this session. And I'd like to thank the audience as well who has shared, who has made the entire session interactive. So thank you, and we look forward to seeing you in our next session, which is on 15th of May. So do register for that session, and we are sure that we are going to have similar kind of rich and interactive session the next one. But do if you have missed any segment of this session, this session replay would be available on YouTube, and it will be also there on LinkedIn, so you can watch the replay. We'll be also sharing insights from this session as part of newsletter, which is 2020X Vision Edge by Growth Sutra. So do watch for those insights as well. But thank you again for joining the session, and look forward to seeing you in on 15th of May.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.